Hi, in this video I'd like to share with you 10 things that the candidates often overestimate in importance in job interviews and hopefully make your life a bit easier here. Okay, the first thing, cheat sheets. Okay, so cheat sheets rarely matter in these job interviews, so don't stress too much over these things because they rarely make any meaningful difference, right? The second thing I'd like to talk about here is that on the importance of fitting into your favorite company's culture. Okay, so by this I mean fitting into some leadership principles or in some core values. Anyway, you know what I mean. The point here is that even though some company says they favor speed over accuracy, this doesn't mean that in your stories, in all your interview answers, you should favor speed over accuracy. It simply means, you will probably gonna get screened on the core behavior of how do you deal with situations when you have to act fast. Okay, so exhibiting the behavior of speed should be something that you would do on demand if they ask you so. You wouldn't want to fit with all your stories in this cultural fit of speed. Okay. Furthermore, if you want to fully benefit from this cultural fit interviewing approach, you would want to prepare for the interview behaviorally, that using your past experiences as a predictor of success in your future role, right? And whenever you get asked a non-technical question, you should identify some key behavior or behaviors they're interested in, such as speed, or maybe it's interpersonal skills, and then sell yourself with the best story you have prepared. But by no means try to fit into company culture. There's no such thing as you hiring for cultural fit. Okay, it's a very misleading term, so to speak, right? Point number 3, you're gonna get stuck. Okay, so many candidates worry too much on this, that, hey, what if I get stuck? When in fact, in my experience, it's quite rare for candidates to get stuck in these job interviews. And even if you get stuck, it's not game over in most cases. Of course, if you get stuck because you said something dumb or you made a monumental mistake, that's a slightly different scenario than getting asked a question you have no idea how to answer, right? But most of the time, whenever you feel like you're getting stuck, it's simply a matter of acknowledging, hey, yes, you cannot know everything, and you can also move on. I've even had candidates who got up-leveled, even though they got stuck in their job interview, right? I guess point number 5 here. Oftentimes, you as a candidate in job interviews expect your interviewer to be highly engaged and interested in building a conversation with you. When in my experience, except for the key stakeholders in the process, such as the hiring manager, chances are your interviewer will prefer an easygoing approach. That is, they would have their agenda with their 3 to 5 interview questions. They would eventually ask you a follow-up question here and there, so they could move on. Okay. Now, what's in for you as a candidate here? Well, I oftentimes advise candidates to consider giving long, convincing first answers. Okay, because on this reasoning, if you give them long, convincing first answer, you will help them. You will make their job easier to satisfy their agenda of 3 to 5 questions, to screen you on the behaviors or on the technical stuff that they're actually interested in, and then you can move on. Both, right? This is in contrast, with the traditional interviewing advice. You should always be to the point, concise, short answers, because there's also risk that those answers might sound reactive. All right, so long, convincing first answer is something that I find you should seriously consider. Right? Point number 5 here. Oftentimes, you are advised to give your answers to non-technical interview questions in the STAR format. Okay. Now, I don't believe there's anything wrong with the STAR format, and I believe it's particularly useful when you do your interview prep. I also sell interview training programs which use the STAR format quite extensively. But from here to fitting all your answers during the job interview, to making the top priority in a job interview to fit your answers in the STAR format, I think there's a very long way to go. And to give you a counterexample here, what happens in a job interview if you forget about the STAR? Let's say you forget the results of your STAR answer. Will you get disqualified? No, in my experience, if you forget the STAR answer, the interviewer will ask you a follow-up, hey, what about some results that you took from that experience, right? So it's by no means a disqualifier if you won't use automatically the STAR format to sell yourself during a job interview, but more of a helping mechanism that for some candidates proves to be super efficient, especially for people who don't call interviewing as their strength. Right, but other than that, don't worry too much about the STAR format in a job interview, except if you want, not to forget the results, so to speak. This is some advice that I found worked best. Okay, number 6, and this will be a slightly controversial one. Okay, I must warn you. Candidates assume that pushing for rejection feedback is it's a must in this job interview. So in other words, let's say you prepared for 3 months straight for your job interview, you failed it, and then because of its company policy not to share rejection feedback, you would want to still push for some feedback because you think it's going to be valuable. In my experience, it's first of all, it's highly uncommon for people who prepare these job interviews seriously not to know why they failed them. I'm talking about the final interviews here. And second, the type of feedback, rejection feedback that I hear when candidates push for it, in my opinion, does not come from the decision makers, but rather from people such as the recruiters, or what they think, or what some friends told them that might have been the reason for rejection. And that's the quality of that feedback, of that rejection feedback, if you push for it, I found to be highly questionable. Okay, so long story short, I would advise you not to push or not to read too much in the rejection feedback you get if you pushed for it. Okay. Point number 7. Repeating your best stories. Okay, so there's at Amazon, for instance, all your interviewers will take a ton of notes, and one of the reasons they take a ton of notes would be to avoid to catch candidates who repeat their stories because they only want to use their best stories. Okay, I found this that some candidates would be scared to death not to repeat any of their stories because they might get disqualified from these job interviews, which is in my experience very rarely the case, right? So in my opinion, if you have more than 10 stories, 10 good stories, then you shouldn't be worried too much about repeating these stories. And why it is important? Well, it's super important because especially in non-technical and behavioral interviews, the best candidates is the one with the best stories, right? So if you have those 10 great stories, no problem if you spin them with, 5 or 6 or even 10 interviewers, right? Because that's how you significantly improve your chances to do well in behavioral interviews, right? So don't worry too much about repeating those stories so long you do feel like you have enough experience for the role that you're applying for. This wouldn't pose a significant problem, right? Number 8, the I versus we dilemma. Okay, so should I say I or should I say we? So this is a problem that is primarily for freshers and for entry-level roles. Because the core problem with this is that interviewers are scared that if you use we all the time, you might not have owned that specific project. Now, in other companies, if you overuse I did versus we did, they might interpret that you're not a team player. There's all sorts of variations of these interpretations and all sorts of rumors in the I versus we dilemma. In my experience, this rarely makes any difference in job interviews so long you're not trying to bluff, it's saying we because you didn't do it. But if you have nothing to hide, then use I or we as you would normally do. So don't change your interviewing style because of this. Okay. Number 9, the job description. Okay, so the job description, some of you consider it as some sort of a golden mine for interviewing inside for these job interviews. Okay, I've been previously involved in the development, and I run an applicant tracking system with hundreds of thousands of candidates in it. And one of the features we provided to our customers were the ability to build their own job descriptions, which we had to pre-build for them, which we did from ONET database with those actual job descriptions, which we provided them as a starting point for their job descriptions. In my experience of running that ATS for, I don't know, 5 years, it's rare for an employer to have modified their job descriptions, so they simply use the standard terminology from ONET in that case, and they moved on, right? Now, in FANG companies, it's slightly different because these companies are rich, so they employ copywriters to make those job descriptions sound even better. But from here to think that these companies tailor each job description whenever they have a new opening, that would be a serious overstatement. Some, yes, they would change, let's say, a sentence or two here and there, but those job descriptions are the same, over time. So then if they're the same over time, why would they be such a golden mine for candidates? Well, in fact, they're not, because there are, so if you really want to know, there are some 2-3 key competencies that they're actually interested in all candidates, but they would never share those competencies with you for the purpose of a job interview, because if they would, everyone would pitch exactly that, right? So there is some hidden agenda, so to speak, on the interviewer's mind, but you will never find that in the job description, right? So the job description, of course, is a good idea to read it once or twice, but it's a marketing manifesto at its core these days. Okay, and finally, number 10 here, your English speaking skills. Okay, so what happens here is that many candidates consider English speaking skills essential to be successful in job interviews with high-performing companies, when in fact, in my experience, this has not been the case. Okay, why do I say this and why I'm so convinced of this? Because I've coached people who can barely speak English, who passed interviews with high-performing companies for very high-paying jobs, because they knew how to choose their keywords. They knew how to communicate ideas clearly without being English speakers or proficient English speakers, so to speak. Okay, so so long you focus on clarity of thought, you'll have a far better outcome than focusing on your English speaking skills, and from English speaking skills you'll get into AI rewarded answers because they sound better, and you would think you'll go on that direction of English speaking skills. So my advice to you would be clarity of thought trumps English speaking skills any day, right? And maybe as a closing remark here, something that I'm saying in almost every video by now on some other things that are highly cosmetic when it comes to job interviews. Selling yourself in job interviews, it's overrated advice. Don't oversell yourself, I would say. It's even better advice, especially in your elevator pitch, because that will show and that will draw suspicion for the remainder of your job interview. Your CV might matter for a screening round if it's well done with well keyworded, but CVs never matter in final interview rounds. Your appearance, video, sound quality, this does not matter so long as they work in job interviews. Nowadays they never did in my experience. And you'll tell me about yourself. Yes, it's an elevator pitch, but it's for impression primarily, because except for the telephone screening rounds where impressions do matter, for final interview rounds, your tell me about yourself can be the starting point of the conversation, which if you oversell yourself on, again, you're going in the wrong direction. But still, tell me about yourself. It's a good idea to prepare, but don't oversell yourself with these things. So these were my top 10 tips for today. I hope you found this useful, and thank you very much for watching.